Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Monday, November 4th, 2013, and here are our top stories.
Tonight on the InfoWars Nightly News, the TSA rears its treasonous head at the Breeders' Cup grope down. Then, Navy SEALs ordered to remove the age-old "Don't Tread on Me" symbol. Plus, President Obama wants to put the fear of God in all of us. All that and more on the InfoWars Nightly News.
Well, last Friday, we didn't have much information about the LA shooting. Now we do, and we have a lot of questions. Let's start with the context for what's going on all over the country at TSA checkpoints. Remember back in 2009 on Christmas Day, the underwear bomber? Remember how the very next day we had all of these machines ready to be rolled out nationwide, provided, of course, by the company that it was then run by the former head of Homeland Security? Now, that was suspicious enough. But we also had Kurt Haskell, an eyewitness on that plane, describe how the shabby-dressed bomber without any paperwork was escorted onto the plane by a man in a suit. Then the following Thanksgiving, 2010, people were fed up with the naked scanners and the invasive pat-downs, and they organized a boycott of the TSA. It was going to happen on the Thanksgiving weekend of travel, the busiest day of travel in the year, and the TSA just simply shut down all the machines. That was an implicit admission that there was no threat, that they would just simply shut them down and let people walk through on the busiest day of the year. Then we found out just a couple of weeks ago that in their own internal documents, the TSA admitted that there was no threat at either airplanes or airports, no terrorist threats. They were not protecting us from anything. This came to light in a lawsuit by John Corbett. The government mistakenly posted an unredacted version of the lawsuit that quoted these internal documents that he was able to see in discovery. They had redacted those documents. They posted the wrong version on pacer.gov, where all lawsuits are supposed to be up. After we reported that, they threatened him, they gagged him, and they took down the unredacted version, and the redacted version is down now. They do not want people to know that there is no threat, there is no terrorist threat. This is not only theater of security that's going on at the airports, but it's a theater for which there is no real threat. That's the damaging admission they don't want to come out. And at the same time, going back to 2011, that they admitted this in their documents, we also had a Texas state legislator, David Simpson, who produced a bill that would stop these child molestations at the airports. They threatened the state of Texas that they would shut down air traffic control if that was passed. So the TSA knew all along that there was no threat. At the time that they were making these threats to the state of Texas, they knew there was no threat. Now we have a shooting. This is something that's going to be very useful for them to tell people that they're something to be protected for. So even though they know there's no threat, they started telling TSA agents back in January of this year to expect attacks on the lines that they created, the lines that increase the security threat at the airports. Then they told them, don't worry, save yourself. This is up to you. So they're not there to protect people. They're going to save themselves. Now, at the press conference that was held this weekend, the police chief said that they've been practicing this scenario for 3 weeks. Then we learned that even though they were practicing this scenario 3 weeks ago, they conveniently removed the police to 5 minutes away from a response to these types of attacks that they've been expecting, they said, since January. We were told by witnesses that the shooter was a heavy man in a TSA uniform. As a matter of fact, the witness was fairly heavy himself and said he was much heavier than him. Then it switches, and we see that it's a thin 23-year-old man who's not in a TSA uniform. There are a lot of things that are changing. We've been lied to and misled by the TSA for years for their agenda. So we're waiting to see what their agenda is. We're waiting to see what kind of new controls are going to try to enact at the airports and elsewhere. And now we're told that the shooter had some kind of New World Order manifesto on him. But just like the videotape footage that would show the actual shooter, whether it was a 23-year-old skinny guy or whether it was a heavy-set man in a TSA uniform, we're also not shown this manifesto. But we're told that it's some kind of fringe idea, this New World Order. Well, we've got a lot of people talking about the New World Order, and you'll see that clip right after the news, so stay tuned. Now, just in case you haven't caught on who the real enemy is, it's not the al-Qaeda Frankenstein monster that the government has created, but it's actually the villagers, because the villagers are going to realize that they've had their possessions stolen, they've had their lives sacrificed in endless wars, and they're going to be upset. The government knows that. So they've been training in this Operation Urban Shield, and this is an article from one of our Planet InfoWars contributors, Kim M., and it says 20 drills that prove the DHS's official new enemy. Out of 47 scenarios being practiced by first responders during Urban Shield 2013, October 25th through 28th in the San Francisco Bay Area, at least 20 of them were domestic, either stated explicitly or implied. And listen to some of these. Anarchist refinery bomber, a domestic terrorist watershed takeover, high-risk search warrant, community justice system takeover, extremist manhunt, domestic terrorist school takeover, environmental terrorist sabotage, and a building collapse where a member of a sovereign citizen movement has driven a truck into a government building, which resulted in a partial building collapse and fire. Now, these are their training scenarios. They're very concerned. They've got the cops so scared of just the words sovereign citizen that if you're accused of being a sovereign citizen, that is something that gets the police ready to start shooting right away. It's a very dangerous thing. They're on a hair trigger about anybody that is labeled a sovereign citizen. But here's what typically happens when the cops come to a scene. Cops have tasered a father who is trying to rescue a 3-year-old from a burning building. Now, that's in Louisiana, Missouri. A father was prevented from saving his 3-year-old from a house that was on fire when the cops tasered him 3 times for attempting to enter the burning building. It's just heartless. How could they be so heartless, said the sister-in-law, Emily Miller. She said, while they just stood around and waited for the fire department, what kind of police officer wouldn't try and save a 3-year-old who's burning in a house? And to make matters worse, they arrested the father after they kept him from saving his son from the burning fire. Now, if you have any question about what's going on in the military or what's happening with our country, take a look at this. Navy SEALs have been ordered to remove "Don't Tread on Me." After the 9/11 attacks, all U.S. Navy ships of war were ordered to return to the traditional "Don't Tread on Me" rattlesnake design for the duration of the war on terror. I guess that would be forever, because that's never going to end, right? All personnel are now authorized only to wear matching American flag patches on their right shoulder, according to a new memo. The memo says you are no longer authorized to wear the "Don't Tread on Me" patch. Again, the only patch authorized for wear is the American flag on the right shoulder. Well, this has been in the flag of the Republic since the birth of the Republic. And one of the reasons they use a rattlesnake is because it warns before it attacks. It doesn't attack unprovoked, and it warns aggressors not to attack it. And that's what that flag is. It's a warning. Now, over the weekend, Ed Snowden made a move for clemency. He pointed out, he said, citizens have a right to fight against the suppression of information about affairs of essential importance for the public. Those who speak the truth are not committing a crime. He was rebuffed by Senator Feinstein. Here's what she had to say. He was trusted. He stripped our system. He had an opportunity, if what he was a whistleblower, to pick up the phone and call the House Intelligence Committee. Both she and Mike Rogers criticized him on Face the Nation. But, you know, this is what really happened. It was really Feinstein and Mike Rogers who betrayed a trust. It was really Feinstein and others who stripped the system. They could have picked up the phone at any time, and they could still do it to stop these illegal surveillance tactics that are being done by the NSA, these dragnet surveillances that are against the Constitution. They could stop it at any time, but they haven't. They're the ones who have betrayed the system and betrayed our trust. We'll stick around right after the news tonight. We've got a lot of extra reports. And right after the break, we're going to be talking to Leanne McAdoo about purges in the military at highest levels. Well, what we're concerned about is a president who acts as if he were God. And one of the places that Obama is trying to instill fear is in the ranks of the military. Leanne McAdoo has more for us.
That's absolutely right, David. The Obama administration has just fired the 10th military commander this year.
Oh, wow.
This guy was in charge of the largest military base in Japan, and he was let go because of a lack of confidence. That was all the details they had given there. So.
That's not very specific.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not going to release further because there was no findings that he had any criminal misconduct. So that's kind of where they're leaving it. But basically, we're definitely seeing that he is purging the military of anyone who does not go along with his communist agenda. Anyone who questions the official line that he's given to the American people and the media. Of the 9 others that were fired, 3 of those generals were either critical of or directly involved with the scandal that happened in Benghazi. In one case, the U.S. Army General Ham, he was commanding the U.S. African Command when the consulate was attacked. He was highly critical of the decision by the State Department not to send in reinforcements. He said reinforcements could have been sent in time. A second admiral who was also fired, he seconded that opinion. He said aircraft could have been sent to Libya in time to help the Americans, and he was later removed from his post for alleged profanity and making racially insensitive comments. So
these are very, very minor charges. They're not very specific. It's kind of like what we saw with the dismissal, unprecedented dismissal of these nuclear commanders, number 1 and number 2. When it happened to the number 2 guy, everybody said this is totally unprecedented. And then it was happened to the number 1 guy for a reason that was even less believable, that he was on a special assignment somehow. How do you have the number 1 nuclear commander on a special assignment? They didn't like the way he performed.
No, yeah, if you don't like the way that Obama performs, you will be purged. And they are sending that message loud and clear through the military. But what we're seeing here is that people who are loyal to the Constitution, the military and our veterans, people who have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, those people are being relieved of duty. The people who are being replaced are people who are loyal to the president and loyal to Obama.
That's very troubling, because it's not just an issue. We want civilian control of the military, but we want civilian control by people who have taken an oath to defend the Constitution and really mean it. And of course, we don't find anybody like that in Washington much, right?
Exactly.
It's not just the president. It's pretty much pervasive with everybody. They take these oaths, but they really don't really believe them, don't follow through on them.
Right, and Obama really takes advantage of the fact that the military adheres to that constitutional requirement to have a civilian leadership over the military. But he is no civilian. He's a tyrant. He acts like a tyrant, and he is bought and paid for by the New World Order. So we see that Obama has no problem firing high-ranking officials in the military, but he won't go after his own officials in his administration and investigate Benghazi.
And that's the key. It's Benghazi. That's what he wants to avoid people looking at in detail at all costs. That's something the military takes very seriously. They don't like being told to stand down and leave their personnel stranded to die. That's made a lot of people in the military angry throughout the ranks, and he's purging those ranks of people. That's not a scandal that's going to go away. That is something that is very serious. It should take him out of office. Well, thank you, Leanne. Appreciate that. Well, if you're tired of the privacy violations and the mandates of Obamacare, stick around after the break. We're going to have an interview with James Lansbury of Samaritan Ministries. He's going to describe what, in his terms, he calls islands of freedom. They're exemptions that have been put in Obamacare for health care sharing ministries. That'll be right after the break. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Tyranny Watch. I'm Gigi Arnetta. This week, Obamacare continues to torpedo, and President Obama goes on a mystery tour. The first stop on the mystery tour, he puts his support behind Democrat Terry McAuliffe.
Nothing makes me more nervous than when my supporters start feeling too confident. So I want to put the fear of God in all of you.
The fear of God? God puts his fear in people, not the President of the United States. And believe me, Christians would love it if the President spent more time in the Word, instead of touring and spewing propaganda. The next stop on the tour is a closed-door meeting with political allies at his Organizing for America group, where he's expected to tout the program, which is driving up health care costs for millions of Americans. Then on to immigration reform. And for some reason, he's flying to Texas for a health care speech, then to New Orleans to talk about jobs.